This evening is all about raising funds for Maggie's cancer caring centres, which are run entirely by charitable donations. So thanks very much again for your presence here tonight. We're going to hear, first of all, from a remarkable woman. She might not describe herself that way, but she certainly is. We'll hear a bit about climbing tonight, and I know a lot about climbing. I live on the top floor of a Victorian tenement in the West End. Would you welcome, please, Vicky Jack.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dave, for that very nice introduction. And good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here. What I want to do is just tell you a little bit about how I got into climbing. And actually, I'm quite a late developer when it came to that. I didn't actually start hill walking till I was in my 30s. And the reason I started was I wanted to get to know Scotland. I knew it by the roads, but I'd never strayed off the roads. And I felt quite embarrassed about it because I am quite patriotic. So I decided to take up sailing and hill walking. And I like to have a goal to go for because I'm actually basically quite lazy. So I decided I would try and do all of the Munros in Scotland. And I think at the moment the number's around about 284, but it tends to change quite regularly. But it took me 10 years to do that. And then I was actually quite lost because I didn't know what to do next. I'd had a full 10 years every weekend going up the hills or going sailing. And then all of a sudden I'd done them. So now what? So I was in the pub one night with some friends, and one of the chaps said, well, why not try the highest hill in Europe? And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. So we all chatted about how I might be able to find a guide to take me up Mont Blanc. None of us came up with the answer, so I went away, and a few weeks later, I discovered actually that Mont Blanc is not the highest hill in Europe. It's one called Mount Elbrus in the Caucasus in Russia. So thankfully, my blushes were spared and I didn't go up the wrong hill by mistake. But I managed to find a guide to take me up Elbrus. And this is it here. Elbrus is the left-hand one. It doesn't look higher, but it is. And it always seems to be the peak that's furthest away, that's the top one. But this was a bit of a cheat, actually, because we got a cable car halfway up the hill, which I thought was quite good. And it took us to about here. And then we walked from there to a hut, which looked rather like a TARDIS, a big metal thing that's about 4 or 5 floors high. It's since burnt down, actually. And it was about here. And then to get to the summit, we played around in the snow for a couple of days to acclimatise, but to get to the summit, we went up to these rocks here, called the Pastiche Rocks, and then we walked round here and up to the top. It wasn't a huge climb, it wasn't particularly difficult in terms of technical, but it certainly exercised your lungs. And it was coming down off that hill that someone asked me if I was doing the 7 summits. Now, I'd never heard of them before, and he explained that it was the highest hill in each continent in the world, and that it included Mount Everest. And when I heard that, my heart just leapt, and I knew that was what I was going to do. So 2 months after doing this, I set off to Kilimanjaro. And this is it here, and it's actually an amazing hill because it stands out on its own. And I remember the bus driving us towards the hill, and the bus stopped on the side of the road, and we were told, get out and have a look. And none of us had actually seen the hill because it was cloudy, to be honest. And we got out of the bus and looked up, and there was lots of cloud. But if you strained your neck right back, you saw the top of Kilimanjaro peeking out of the clouds up above. And it was absolutely amazing. And we just stopped and said, how on earth are we going to manage to climb that height? Normally you don't see the top of the hill from the bottom. So our acclimatization hill for this one was Mount Kenya, and we went up to a trekking peak called Point Lenana. And that was actually good fun. We went up reasonably quickly. This is a couple of the people in the top hut. Now, we were all suffering from headaches, an element of altitude sickness, when we were up here. And this is Sammy, our guide, who was a very accomplished climber, but he used one or two of his other skills to help us try and get over the headaches and the pain. He used to be the Kenyan disco dancing champion. So this is him trying to just get us going and do some dancing. So it's not all serious and hard work when you go climbing. So having done Kilimanjaro and Elbrus, I then decided to try and go for altitude. Then I was going to go for the cold, and then I would combine the two. And that was my little plan. So this one was the one I went for next, and this was in December 1998. And it's called Aconcagua. It's about 23,000 feet high in South America. It's actually in Argentina, on the border with Chile. And it was, I think we were in a party of about 10 people then, and it was quite a long slog to get to the top. But I'm pleased to say we actually stood on the summit on Christmas Day 1998. So from there, it was time to go to the cold. So the following November, I set off for Antarctica, and we flew down from Punta Arenas, which is at the bottom end of Chile, in a Hercules plane, which took about 6 hours to fly down to Antarctica. And we flew into a camp at a place called Patriot Hills. And from there, after a couple of days, we climbed into a twin otter plane, and we were flown across, and this is us in the twin otter actually, flying across to the Vinson Massif, and that's it there. Beautiful weather when we started. The plane dropped us off at the bottom of the hill, and we were three, our party was 3 people, and we put up our tents, the 2 tents, and you'll notice there's something over here. This is actually a modesty wall. As you'll see, there are no trees, there's nothing to hide behind. So that was put there. So the 3 of us actually stood in a line and watched this plane taking off. And it was an amazing feeling. There was no wind then, there was no noise, there were no animals there, no birds, nothing. And we watched this plane gradually take off and get smaller and smaller and smaller in the distance. And the noise got less and less and less until we couldn't hear the engine of the plane at all. And we still stood silently in a straight line, looking out in this direction. And certainly at that time, I realized just how important it was that the 3 of us got on very well together and supported each other, because we would need to support each other. If there was a storm, there was no rescue, because there had to be no wind if a plane was going to come in and collect us. So we were very vulnerable in a team of 3, which is quite small. However, we also laughed after the plane left and after the silence was broken. And we set off up the hill. Now actually it's not a difficult one to climb. It only took about 4 days, but it is cold. Now this is in the top camp, and you'll notice that when you actually put in your tent, you've got to dig out the snow and the ice and sink your tent down to get protection from wind. We also had to cut blocks of ice to build a wall round us as well, again for protection. But by this time, 4 or 5 days into our trip, we were getting quite blasé about things. And you'll see that we've built in holes, which is all part of our kitchen. And we put food in one bit and whatever in the next, and we really felt quite pleased with ourselves. But actually we did that to try and keep warm. We only had 1 tent at the top camp, and that was on purpose because we knew it was going to be so cold. And 3 of us were in a 2-man tent, and we still were bitterly cold through the night. But we went for I say through the night actually, but it was 24 hours of daylight. Basically we just slept when we felt that we needed to sleep, and then we went on. But the weather was quite good. We got to the summit, beautiful day, or beautiful time, I don't know what time of day it was. And then we headed back down, no problems at all, got down to our base camp. There was a bit of bad weather coming in. We had to wait for a couple of days before there was a gap, a window, where the plane could come and collect us. We did have radio contact with Patriot Hills. And the plane came in and took us back to Patriot Hills. So from here, it was then a case of, now it was the big hill to go for, and the big hill for me is Mount McKinley in Alaska. Very tough hill, because there are no Sherpas and porters, you have to carry everything yourself. So this is at the bottom of Mount McKinley, otherwise known as Denali. And you can see the packs lying down there. There were 4 of us on the trip. And I was the only woman, but that doesn't mean I carry any less weight than the men, rightly so as well. So I was carrying about 50 pounds on my back and dragging a sledge of 100 pounds. And we dragged these from about 6,000 feet up to 14. So it was heavy going. That's me at the back there. So we went up to 14,000 feet, and then there's 1,000 foot of an ice wall, so we had to porter our kit up there. And that took 2 trips. We spent a night on a ridge and then went on up to our top camp, again portering our kit on the way up. And at the top camp, weather was okay, so we went for the summit. Got to the top, weather was good, everything was fine. They always say that coming down is meant to be the most dangerous part of climbing. Well, we came back down to our top camp, we were feeling good, and we decided, no, let's not bother portering kit back down, let's load up and just do it in one go. If you just picture this for a second, we were coming down along a shoulder, and it was rocks and ice, and then we got to a bit where the rocks came down very steeply, and there was a ledge, quite narrow, and we had to go round this ledge. It was about a 3,000 foot drop on the other side of the ledge. And I knew you had to be careful and watch your footing. So I set off really concentrating on my feet. We were roped up, which is just as well. But my pack, I'd forgotten how wide it was and how big it was. And it just nudged, it wasn't big, it just nudged this rock face, just enough to make me wobble. So I put my foot out to save myself, but of course there was nothing there. I put it out into mid-air. So I fell off, dropped about, not very far, I would say I maybe dropped about 10 feet, but there I was dangling. There was a slight overhang, so I couldn't see the 2 people who were supporting me on this rope. Now they'd done the right thing, they'd just stopped when they felt weight on the rope and stood still. It was quite windy and I couldn't see them, so we couldn't really communicate. So there I was hanging over this precipice with about 3,000 foot of airspace beneath me, wondering what to do. I couldn't get a purchase on the rock face, which was covered with verglas, which is thin ice. I couldn't get a grip on that with my crampons or my ice axe. So I was wondering whether I ought to actually jettison my pack. But I had a tent, I had all sorts of kit that everybody needed, not just me. And I was pondering over this when a face came over the top of the ridge. And the person said, hello, and it was an American woman. I'll never forget it. And I looked up and said, hello. and she said, oh, you're a woman. And I said, yes. And she said, I'm so pleased to meet you. You'll understand my problem. I'm climbing with men and they don't understand it, but I've got hammer toes and my feet are killing me. And I said, oh, really? And she said, yes, I'm so pleased to have met you. Goodbye. And on she went. So there I was, still hanging, wondering what to do. So fortunately, I had a thing called a jumar on my harness, which is something you can clip onto a rope and slide it up, but it doesn't slip back. So I thought I would try that. But remember, I've got a massive pack on my back and I'm not that strong. And this was all going to be upper body strength that would need to pull me up this rope onto the ledge. Now, how I did it, I don't know. I assume it was adrenaline. I'm not sure. But I managed to get onto this ledge again. And then we set off down the hill. It took another couple of days before we got to the bottom. But anyway, we got to the bottom quite safely after that. And you see who's carrying the bottle of whiskey. So from there, the next hill was a strange one actually. It was down near the equator and it was the Australasian continent and it was in Irian Jaya, which is the other half of Papua New Guinea. And I just thought I'd let you see, this is one of the locals. And I couldn't believe how he climbed onto the plane and was quite comfortable in a so-called modern plane. It was a pretty ropey one, actually. But he was quite comfortable with the modern technology and wasn't fazed by it at all. And they came and helped us with our bags, took us to the village. Very friendly people. The women wore raffia skirts and had painted bodies. They didn't sleep with their husbands. They slept with their prized possessions, their pigs. And the women fed their babies on their right breast and the piglets on their left breast. So it was quite primitive. This is actually our base camp for climbing. And essentially, this is just a 3,000-foot rock face to climb. And what we had to do was to go over this rock face, drop 1,000 feet down into the next valley, and the climb was actually up here, and the hardest bit was this notch, which looks nothing, but actually it was really technically quite difficult. And then we went along to the summit. It's not a hill I would recommend anyone goes to try. This is the notch, and we had to abseil down into the bottom of it, climb around this rock, and then it was about 100-foot overhang that we had to climb up. And I believe I was the first one to climb up. And unfortunately for me, somebody filmed it. And afterwards, when he played back the film, which had sound in it, unfortunately, I didn't know I knew some of the words that I was coming out with. But that was that one done. And as I say, I wouldn't recommend anyone goes there. It wasn't an attractive place either. But that was that. So now there was only one left to go, and that was Everest. So I really was getting quite excited about this one. And I'm going to start at the other end of Everest. You'd expect me to start at the bottom, but I'm going to just talk about this on purpose for a reason. Now, there are 4 camps on Everest, and the top camp is the 4th one on the South Col, which is at 26,000 feet. And then it's only 3,000 feet to get to the summit. And to me, that was fine because I could break that down into a Munro size. And if I can do Munros in Scotland, I could do the last 3,000 feet on Everest. And what we did was we climbed from Camp 3 to Camp 4, which took about 7 hours, arriving at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then at 9 o'clock that evening, we would set off to do the summit. And that's the normal way of doing it. So you climb through the night. But you've only got about 5 or 6 hours of rest. And the idea is you arrive in the South Col, you have to try and rehydrate and eat something, which is very difficult to do at that altitude. Remember, you're on oxygen as well. Try and get a little bit of rest, and then you get up at 8 o'clock in the evening in the dark and leave at 9. And that, an hour to get ready is actually very swift, because any movement is very difficult to do, and it's actually also difficult for your mind to work efficiently and effectively. However, this was in 2003, which was the 50th anniversary of Edmund Hillary climbing Everest. So there were a lot more people on the hill this year than there had been in previous years. The weather was also bad, and normally you get about 3 days during the month of May, not consecutive days normally, when you can actually get to the summit. And at the end of May, the monsoon brings the jet stream down, and then you can't go for the summit. Now, this was the 21st of May, and this was the first weather window for getting to the summit. So you can imagine everybody was positioning themselves to try and go for the summit on the same day. So at 9 o'clock at night, when I set off, there was a fixed rope going up the first part of the hill, and there was just a solid speckle of head torches all the way up. It's a pretty heavy climb, but the idea is you have 2 oxygen bottles full at the South Col. You climb halfway up to a place called the balcony. You've used up 1 bottle of oxygen by then, so they take the empty one out, and there's a stack that the Sherpas have put up on the balcony, which is a small ledge, not a big one, and they put in a new bottle for you, and that should be you fine for the summit and back down to the South Col. No problem. Got up to the balcony, and exhausted, my Sherpa told me to sit down, and he would do everything. He would replenish my bottle of oxygen, etc. I was aware and this is in the dark, I was aware that there was a lot of shouting and talking in Nepalese, but because I was so tired and I was trying to get breath, I wasn't listening and I wasn't really aware of what was going on. But anyway, I was told that was fine, we could continue. So I did, and the two of us went off and joined the queue, if you like, going up towards the south summit. I was also aware that there were some flashes going on behind me. I didn't realise it was lightning. Then the dawn came up, beautiful dawn, but then a wind came up. And I'd been told if a wind comes straight down into your face, it's bad. It's a big storm that's coming. And I suppose that's partly the jet stream dropping down. If it comes across the way, don't worry too much. Well, a wind started coming straight down into our faces. And I continued going up to the south summit, and it was getting quite strong, and the clouds were down, there was no view at all. People were turning back. Now, my Sherpa is meant to stick to me like glue, but I make the decisions. He doesn't decide when to turn round, and rightly so as well. I decided I wanted to go on, so I dropped down off the south summit onto this ridge, which is the summit ridge. Now, I couldn't see any of this because, remember, it was a storm. The wind was getting pretty strong, and I was being blown over a bit, but not completely over. Down on this summit ridge, there were more people turning back, and I must say I did think, should I be turning round or what? But I decided no, I was going to go on. And I got as far as the Hillary step, which is here. And the people were standing at the bottom of the Hillary step. I couldn't see the top of it because of the clouds and the storm. Nobody was moving until these enormous gusts of wind came, and we were then literally blown over. Not just sort of nudged, but we were completely blown over. And at that moment I thought, what am I doing here? This is silly. So I decided to turn round. We headed back, the Sherpa and myself, and we went over the south summit. We were just dropping off the south summit when I started to go very slowly. Sherpa looked at my oxygen and I'd run out. And this was just below 28,000 feet. And unfortunately, he'd run out as well. And I'll never forget it. In the storm, he pulled his oxygen mask down and shouted at me through the storm, I die, you die, we both die, I go. And with that, he left me. So there I was, just below 28,000 feet, no oxygen, on my own, in a storm, and not an experienced climber. So I set off. I don't remember a lot about it. How I got down here on my own, I don't know. I do remember looking over an edge and thinking, oh, if I fall over here, I'm going to die. Didn't worry me. I continued on down. I had to do a couple of abseils. Don't know how I did it, don't remember them. And then I was very thirsty. And remember, it's still in a storm, still cloudy, I couldn't see a thing. But somehow I managed to get down to within about 100 yards of the South Col and the camp. And it was there that a couple of Sherpas had started to come out to look for me, and they actually carried me into the camp. So I was absolutely fine. So that was my first attempt. But interestingly enough, that was in 2003. Before I got down to base camp, I was excited again because I decided I'm going to come back again next year. So I did. And in 2004, I went back. This is showing a shot of the walk-in to base camp, and it was a delightful walk-in. I'd recommend it to anyone. It's about 26 miles, gentle walking from village to village. We stopped on the way. It took us about 10 days, and in each village we went up a hill and then came back down again for acclimatization. This is Everest here, and this hill over here I would like to do at some stage. That's called Amada Blam, and it's just a beautiful hill. Hopefully next year. So we walked in. This is, I'm sorry it's dark, but this is some of the motley crew at base camp. And if you see this building here, this was built by the Sherpas, and it's their kitchen tent or kitchen building. And they do this every year that they come up, and they have to build it from scratch because this is all on a glacier that's moving about 30 meters a year. So each year they've got to completely rebuild it. Very sophisticated. This is the inside. And you'll see they've got 3 burners. This one is on all the time, melting snow for water and drinking. The other 2, they made 3-course meals for us every night for 17 people, and then they cooked their own meals on these 2 burners. They were stunning people, the Sherpas, and all they wanted to do was to make sure you were okay. And we were, because we sat round and did nothing and chatted for days and days and days, waiting for weather or to recover from a foray into the icefall. So you can see it's all quite casual and relaxed. I think this chap over here has got a bowl of water to do his washing in, and you just went around your chores. But these rocks are on ice, and the ice is moving underneath. So every now and then we had to move tents because chasms would open up underneath them, and it wasn't very safe to stay there. And also rocks would tumble down, so you had to watch when the sun was melting the ice under the rocks and would destabilize them. But that was our nice little camp for 6 or 8 weeks. This is the view of base camp. It's huge. Lots of lovely prayer flags. And the icefall is up here. I think you can see some people here starting to go up the icefall. I just want to show you 1 or 2 pictures of the icefall because it's something that you all hear about. And this is looking from really the bottom 1/8, if you like, of the icefall back to base camp. And you can see it is just a waterfall of ice. And as I say, it's moving all the time, so it's very dangerous to be in. And actually, it felt rather like Russian roulette. Because you go up to acclimatise and come back down again to rest, and then go further up to acclimatise more and come back down to rest, we had 5 return trips through this icefall. And each time you got through unscathed, you thought, must be the next time something's going to get me. So it was quite, you never relaxed going through here, and really we didn't stop much at all. But you can see it's just a mess of that we had to pick our way through. What we tended to do was actually try and set off in the dark for the bottom half, and then have the top half, because that's where most of the crevasses and the bridges were, the ladders, during daylight. And the idea behind that was we wanted to be through the icefall before the sun actually got onto it, because it heats up very quickly, uncomfortable to walk in, but also it destabilizes the ice a lot. So that's looking down. There's a ladder that we had to cross, and I don't have a head for heights, and I really struggled going across the ladders. There were about 30 of them to cross. So you can see, and this was a nice day, and also at the start of the season being the beginning of May, and these ladders are all nice and tightly tied in. But even within that month, that could either have collapsed a bit and got thinner, and so the ladder would bend and some of the rungs would spring out, and they'd just be in Q ladders, lashed together, or other crevasses would become wider, and the ends of the ladders would be swinging. And you'd need to try and step down onto this moving ladder, which with a horrible drop underneath you. And always there was something at the bottom of that drop, like a glove or goggles or something like that, which gave you the sense of perspective so you could see how deep it was. And there were also some vertical ladders to go up as well, and they moved enormously. So then this is the top of the icefall, and then you go on to Camp 1, and from Camp 1, this is looking back to Camp 1, the icefall is over here. Then we had 10 big slots to climb through. Now they were enormous, they would take this whole church easily, so we actually had to climb down into them along the bottom and up again, and that was quite tiring. And then we had a long walk in up a thing called the Western Combe to Camp 2, and Camp 2, this is the Western Combe here, Camp 2 is here. And from there, we went to the bottom of the Lhotse face and climbed up 3,000 feet to Camp 3, which is here. Horrible camp. There's virtually no room for your tents. The Sherpas are marvellous. They go up beforehand and try and make the places for your tents and pitch them for you. And this is where actually we start to be on oxygen. And you can see that you're gaining altitude here quite a lot. It's about 23,000 feet. And from there, it's up through a place called the Yellow Band, and this is a band of rock which actually used to be on the seabed. And we climbed across that over a spur called the Geneva Spur and round to the South Col. And this is what took about 7 or 8 hours to do. And once we were in the South Col, you can see the bottom of the tip of a tent down there. This is the last 3,000 feet. The balcony where we went for the extra oxygen is here. And so that's 1,500 feet up to there, and then it's just up to the summit from there. One of the things you've got to watch out when you're climbing is with an oxygen mask, you've got to watch that the ice doesn't build up too much where you're exhaling. If it does, then you can't exhale properly, and then you're breathing in stale air, which isn't good at all. Up at the top of Everest, there's a third of the amount of oxygen that we're having down here. So you do need the oxygen, or most people do anyway. Very few can get up without it. And this is going up towards the south summit. And then this is back to the summit ridge with the Hillary Step, which actually isn't very high, and it's not that impressive if it was down at this level. It's only about 30, 40 feet high. But it's at that altitude that makes it really difficult. And I hadn't appreciated how close I'd been to the summit when I'd turned round the year before. I think if I'd known, I wouldn't have gone. I'd have gone on up to the top and probably perished. And this is a view from the summit, which was quite spectacular. Having set off at 9 o'clock the night before, we got to the summit at 8 o'clock in the morning. And this is the summit. Now, interestingly enough, when I actually came up towards the summit, these chaps were blocking my way. I came up from the far side. And I would have blocked anyone else's way. There was no problem with them being there. But the problem for me was, how did I get round them to get to the summit? And it was strange. I had this, it was the only point on the whole hill that I had this feeling, oh no, I'm not going to make it to the summit. I can't get round these people without falling. Now, I'm not roped up, and I was exhausted being up there, and you can see the land falls away very steeply. It's a very small top. I hadn't realised it was so small. And I thought I would trip as I went round these chaps, and if you slip, that's you're away, you're gone forever. And the Sherpa realised and helped me a lot to get round these people. And I was so scared, I just plonked myself down. And in fact, I discovered I was sitting on top of a picture of the Dalai Lama. I think you can see it just peeking out to the right-hand side of me. And I didn't look up. I couldn't look up. And I was really, I wasn't comfortable, and I wasn't happy being on the summit. And my Sherpa again came to my rescue and took off a head torch, the hood, my hat, goggles, and put things into my pack for me. He pulled out a camera and told me to look up. And I tell you, it took an awful lot for me to try and pull myself together. I said, look, come on, you're here, you're on top of the world, you'll never be back, you've got to look up. But it took an awful lot to look up. But when I looked up, the view was just so stunning. It just hit me between the eyes, so literally. And I had this lovely warm feeling coming up from inside. And it was an amazing feeling of inner peace. And that was it. So thank you very much indeed for listening.
Vicky Jack, ladies and gentlemen. Did she really say, I don't have a head for heights? I'm still trying to get my own head around the idea about the traffic on Everest and how congested it was near the top. What is that all about?